Hello and welcome to Worldly Wise, the Federal's weekly program on trending international developments. Joining us is our consulting editor, K.S. Dakshina, a specialist in world affairs. This week's episode is about the renewed tensions in the Middle East or West Asia. The US Iran conflict appears to be at yet another crucial turning point. While diplomatic efforts are continuing, both the US and Iran are also persisting with military strikes across the Gulf. The big question is whether the region is moving towards peace or heading into a deeper and protracted conflict. And where does India stand in the overall scenario? Thank you for joining, sir. Let me start the show with a question about India's diplomatic options. 15 seafarers, most of them Indians, have died in attacks on merchant vessels in and around the Strait of Hormuz since the US Israel war on Iran began in February. So, how does this growing toll on Indian lives complicate New Delhi's delicate balancing act between Washington and Tehran?
See, this is a question where, really there are no straight answers in the sense that really India cannot do anything as far as preventing these from happening unless, the war ends or, so it cannot really blame the US or Iran individually. It's both of them combined together that has caused this. Now I'll explain why this is the case. See, there are Indians working across global shipping companies in many, around the world. In fact, according to one estimate, there are 300,000 Indian seafarers who are working in various ships across the world. And India is the third largest, country which, as far as the number of seafarers are concerned. So you can imagine the scale. Now, of this, you naturally have people, Indians working across various ships who are stuck in the Strait of Hormuz. Some estimates say 500, some others say around 200. It's not exactly clear. Maybe it ranges from one to the other. So, unfortunately, I think around 7 Indians have died so far. And initially, the first three seafarers who got caught in the crossfire was from a missile that was struck firing from the US. And now the latest one was kind of a hit from Iran. So both are to blame, and the war really is the direct cause of this death of these innocent civilians. Now, how can India play a role in this? India really cannot do much about it because we don't know what kind of a control it has over other oil companies, etc. Obviously, India cannot control every oil, not oil company, the shipping companies rather. So, in fact, there was a advisory put out by the Indian government some time ago that advising oil companies not to have Indians in their ships which are sailing through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, well, it's an advisory the Indian government has put out. Whether it can be complied with or not, we don't know. And then, how do we deal with, the seafarers who are already dead? So, and the danger is that there are still people stuck there right now. According to reports, there are, like I said, 200 to 500 seafarers are stuck in various ships that are still there in the Strait of Hormuz. So it's a tricky situation, and diplomatically, India has, of course, protested. They're called, earlier. India protested against the US attack that killed 3 sailors. And then now you had, India protesting to Iran against the killing of another sailor just earlier this week. So, I mean, beyond this, there's really nothing much India can do diplomatically. Indirectly, of course, it can join in the mediation efforts and the negotiations that are on, and also add to the existing pressure on Iran and the US by other countries to halt this entire conflict and to kind of restore peace. So that way, that's the only way India can deal with this. And I mean, there was a certain element of disappointment that the US, being a close ally of India, or Iran, which is again another close ally of India, did not really bother much about the Indian seafarers. But practically speaking, they were targeting ships, and in those ships you had Indians working. So, I mean, it's a that kind of a odd situation where really you can neither blame them nor excuse them. So it's something like that. So, but then at the end of the day, the conflict has to end for this to stop the killing of the seafarers.
Speaking of Strait of Hormuz, nearly 200 Indian crew members and 9 Indian-linked tankers are stranded near the blockade choke point. So, raising concerns about their safety and also about India's energy security. So, what practical option does India have now to protect its citizen and also to keep its oil supply secure?
Yeah, as we already spoke about Indian the safety of Indian seafarers or the sailors there. The other important aspect is India's energy security. So, if you go back to the time when the war started, say end of February, on February 28th, before that, at that point, India was importing 40% of its crude oil requirements through the Strait of Hormuz, 60% of its liquid natural gas imports again through Hormuz, and similarly 90% of its liquid petroleum gas LPG through the same. So it was a huge volume that was coming in. But then, of course, the war happened. The Israel and the US, undertook military strikes on Iran, and the war commenced. And since then, it has completely disrupted the oil flows and the other essential fuel that was coming through the Strait of Hormuz. So, what India did over a period of time in this time is that the Indian government looked at diversifying or looking at alternative sources of fuel, which is but natural. So one of the countries that came to India's help, or which India found easy to import oil from, was Russia. So crude oil imports from Russia have really gone up. In fact, in June, India was importing 2.58 million barrels per day from Russia, which amounts to nearly half the monthly requirements of India. And Russia also was giving it at a good price, discount, etc., etc. There was also briefly a waiver of sanctions by the US President Donald Trump, so that facilitated this imports. And in July, this month, as we are talking, the imports have actually gone up much more than even in June. So Russia has become a very key supplier, and it's not just Russia. India is also looking at is also getting its LNG and LPG from Venezuela and the US itself. Okay, so but then the point here is that these are the distance that they have to travel is much more. But obviously there is no other option but to look for other suppliers. So, and India, what India is also doing is it is also modifying its terminals that are receiving these supplies. Like in Mundra port, you have this carrier terminal called VLCC, very large carrier terminal. So, what it basically does is that India is trying to expand it and modify it to get fuel from non-Hormuz sources. So there is a lot of these kind of modifications India is doing, but there is also some risks to this. Now, there has been a proposal in the US saying, a bill that is not yet passed, but which is pending, which wants the US to impose 100% tariff on countries like India, and it has named 5 countries that includes China as well, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia are also there in this amongst these 5 countries. And the proposal is that US should impose 100% tariff on countries like India, which are buying oil from Russia. But it's, of course, it's still in the proposal stage. But Trump being Trump, it is very possible that it could happen. But then, until it happens, it has not happened. And really, right now, the energy situation is so critical that India probably has very few options but to look for other sources, and Russia is a very key player in that as far as I'm concerned.
Yeah. And President Trump has actually threatened to bomb Iranian power plants and bridges next week, if Tehran refuses to return to negotiations. So, does targeting civilian infrastructure suggest that Washington is trying to, force a quick deal, or do you think are we looking at a permanent shift towards a total war?
I mean, if you look at the manner in which the conflict is now, going or continuing, the flare up, and if you can call it, over the last 1 week, this flare up that started. Um, the question really is that MOU that was signed, the memorandum of understanding between Iran and the US, is it still functional, or what is its status? Now, the funny part is that neither the US nor Iran is really bluntly saying that the MOU is dead and we are back to war. Both the countries are not saying that. At the same time, they are continuing with this kind of battle of attrition, or which is going on, because suddenly, other than the traditional differences or the traditional disputes that existed, and on the nuclear front, and the US wanting to do regime change in Iran, the Strait of Hormuz has become a very big issue, and it's grown into a huge obstacle. So both the countries are unable to proceed beyond Hormuz without first tackling Hormuz. At the same time, so what it basically does is that it tends to dilute the provisions of the MOU, which clearly said that both the countries should stop attacking each other. And there were some gray areas. Now, among the gray area was who would control the Hormuz Strait. Now, as far as the US is concerned, Trump said that the US would withdraw the blockade if Iran also let go its control over the Hormuz Strait. Now, what Iran has realized is that if they let go of the control of Hormuz Strait, they lose an important leverage point in the negotiations that are going on, and that gives the US an upper hand. So they are holding on to the leverage that they have in Hormuz. Now, because they are holding on to the leverage in Hormuz, the US has, returned with a blockade and said that, okay, if you are going to, hold on to Hormuz, we are going to insist on the blockade, and we are going to block it, and it's already done. Now, the US is going a few steps further, saying that now we are going to attack the military infrastructure that enables Iran to, control Hormuz. Now, so over the last 1 week, several strikes have happened, across the southern coast of Iran, and Trump has realized that it's not really helping to the extent that he wanted. So now he's expanding that to the north of Iran, and possibly some of these arms dumps, and the nuclear storehouses or the nuclear reactors. We still are not. It's not still very clear. So what Trump is doing is expanding. At the same time, the irony is that when he was asked the question whether the negotiations are done, he said no. The US and Iran are still in touch with each other. They're still talking to each other. In fact, when the interviewer asked Trump, when did you last talk to an Iranian negotiator? He said, I'm not talking, but my team just spoke to somebody in Iran just 1 hour ago, from whenever the interviewer asked, which obviously means that the lines are still open, communication is still on between the two. At the same time, you also have these attacks that are going on, and it is completely unclear, which way it is heading. So, in fact, there are analysts who are now talking about this Iran-US conflict turning into a protracted war, which it's, a never-ending war kind of a thing, or a very, very long-term war, which the US has got embroiled in. If you look at Iraq, if you look at Afghanistan, after the World Trade Center attack, the US got involved for 20 years in Afghanistan, And again, for several years, not 20, but even then, the involvement of US is very much there in as far as Iraq is concerned, even till today, though indirectly. So, what has happened is the question is this war also going to end that way? But if it really does that, then it's going to cause, massive problems around the world. It may not happen that way, but these are the possibilities that are being discussed now. That anything is possible. So that's the situation broadly.
Yeah, and also there were also reportedly posters in Iran, with Trump's picture, where Trump was lying in a coffin, and it was all around the Iran. That also got viral. So also Iran's leadership has declared an existential war with America, while commercial shipping through the strait has officially plummeted to a dangerous 2 month low. So with military position, with oil prices surging and both sides heavily dug into their military positions, do you think a diplomatic breakthrough is possible realistically, right now, given the situation?
See, what you said was interesting about the anti-US or the anti-Trump posters and the banners that appeared during Ali Khamenei's funeral. In fact, if you look at the mediation that was going on, there was a temporary pause to the mediation to facilitate Iranian officials and the leadership to focus on the funeral and then return after the funeral. Now, the point here is during this time, the mood in Iran, it changed, in some sense, in the sense that if you recollect, Khamenei was assassinated a day after the war started. On I think probably March 1st or March 2nd or something. And over a period of time, I mean, many other things happened. The whole conflict expanded, and the war expanded. It became a very large issue and all that. So, in some sense, Khamenei was kind of in the background. Now, because of the funeral, it came back into the forefront, and it again aroused the emotional the emotional part of the Iranian mood, and then so everybody's got caught up in that, like this death to Trump and death to the US and all that has started. So it's in some ways that is when Iran also said very strongly that it will not let go of Hormuz, and then the US has retaliated. So in some ways, what we are seeing today could also be a reaction to Khamenei's funeral and the anger and the outrage, plus the sorrow of his death. And after all, let's not forget, though they are negotiating with each other just now, it's clearly the US which assassinated Khamenei. So maybe the only hope is that this can in some ways they can probably wait for a few days for it to subside and then let the negotiations take over, because the mediation as both Trump and Iran are saying is still continuing. So the mediation if it again takes a kind of a the initiative, and the countries are at it because there is a lot of pressure from US allies around Iran, from the Gulf countries and the other regions, which are now being attacked by Iran in retaliation to US attacks on it. So that pressure is very much there. It is there. It's probably happening at the back channels and forcing the US to continue talking to Iran, and also Iran to talk to the US, because after all, these countries don't have anything with Iran per se, but at the same time, Iran is bombing the military bases in these countries, which indirectly means attacking those countries, right? So it's a kind of a complicated issue, but and also as far as the world is concerned, the world is going to be affected by the situation in Hormuz. So there are also pressure from allies of the US and other countries in the world to somehow halt this fighting. So these pressures and plus, let's not forget the midterm elections that are going to happen end of the year in the US, and Trump is very much conscious that he has to resolve this one way or the other and stop the fighting. Otherwise, I think he'll have a bad show at the polls. So all these things put together should kind of in some ways overtake the mood that exists in Iran now, that of outrage and anger at Khamenei's killing, and hopefully let's hope that the conflict subsides over the next few weeks. Otherwise, it's not good for anyone, neither the US or Iran or anyone else. And one more positive thing which we shouldn't forget is that Israel and Lebanon have actually got into some kind of a negotiation. The fighting is almost stopped in southern Lebanon. In fact, there are also reports that Israel may pull out its troops from parts of southern Lebanon. So, in that sense, there is some kind of a silver lining as far as Israel-Lebanon ties or the conflict is concerned. So it's a kind of a mixed bag, let's say, and then we should only hope that the mediation works at the end of it, and we see an end to this war.
So that brings us to the end of our discussion on the growing security and economic challenges in the Strait of Hormuz. Thank you for joining us. For more in-depth analysis of the biggest geopolitical developments, keep watching this space every Thursday at 8 p.m.